Good afternoon, everybody. We're on episode number 6. I hope everyone's doing well and staying safe. Things are changing by the minute, it feels like. And the only upside of all of this is that I can still record these sessions in my slippers. But I hope that everyone's okay, doing well. Today we thought we'd talk a bit about welfare benefits after serious injury. We're going to talk a bit about the issues that frequently come up after people have been seriously injured. We're going to talk about the appeals process, and we're even going to talk a bit about the dreaded C word, which of course is coronavirus. And today we've got Grace Horvath Franco with us, who is a senior paralegal in our pro bono hours of free legal advice every year to lots of different people with different issues, whether they have legal claims or not. And of course, there are common themes, and Grace, you'll know better than I will. There are common themes that come up all the time, I imagine, with people that are seriously injured. So we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A and find out more about that. But I thought it would be helpful to kind of run through sort of a quick fire guide to the main issues that arise in terms of welfare benefits. So what advice do you generally give, Grace, to seriously injured people about claiming benefits? And does the position change from that initial stage where they're in the hospital to when they're discharged home?
So it's important to note that there are a number of welfare benefits which are available for seriously injured clients. Most importantly, personal injury dependence payment, universal credit, and employment support allowance. These people may not have claimed benefits before and they might be hesitant to, but it's important for them to understand that welfare benefits are there for a reason and they are intended to help people in vulnerable situations. It's also important to note that if your client's employed, they could automatically get sick pay, whether it's contractual or statutory. So they should contact their employer in the first instance to inquire about this. I'm just going to run through a couple of the important benefits. So first off, we've got PIP, which is personal independence payment, and it has replaced the previously known disability living allowance. It's a non-means tested benefit, which is not dependent on capital or national insurance contributions, and it's payable to those aged 16 or over and under state pension age. And it's made up of 2 elements, a daily living component and a mobility component. And whether your client qualifies for these depends on an assessment by the DWP of the person's ability to perform specific activities relating to daily living and mobility. And what happens is that this is assessed during a visit from a health professional at home, and they decide how the person's disability limits their ability to do these activities. And there are 2 rates of PIP. You've got the standard PIP if your ability is limited, and then you've got the enhanced rate if your ability is severely limited. So in order to apply, you just have to call the DWP for a claim form. But it's really important to note that you can't claim this benefit whilst you're in hospital. You can only claim it when you've been discharged. But because the DWP does take quite a long time in processing applications, you can make the claim whilst you are in hospital, and then let them know when you're discharged, and it will run from the day you're discharged. So it's important to note that. If your client's over 65, so over state pension age, there is an alternative benefit called attendance allowance, which is basically the same as PIP, paid at 2 different rates, also not means tested, it's just for those over age 65. Another really important benefit is universal credit, which is means tested, so it's dependent on your capital, it's non-taxable, and it's basically to cover living expenses. It's payable to people of working age again, who are of low income and out of work. If you're out of work because of a disability, you might get a topped up allowance on top of the standard allowance of universal credit. To claim this benefit, you have to apply online and then attend an interview at a job centre. I've actually made quite a comprehensive guide, which you can find on our website, or get in touch if you'd like a copy of it. And the last benefit that I'd recommend is the employment support allowance, which is another disability allowance specifically for people whose disability has affected their ability to work. So say if, they had quite a manual labour job, and now that they're paralysed, they can no longer carry out that work, they could be eligible for this benefit. But this is based on national insurance contributions paid within the last 2 tax years. And again, applications made online, and you'll have to go through a medical assessment to see if you're eligible.
Yeah, and of course, with all of these things, Grace, it's not straightforward, and a lot of people I know have difficulties with the eligibility criteria and how it's presented, and we'll talk about appeals in a little minute. But just to go back, the document that you mentioned, the guide, we'll make sure that there's a link to that at the end of the recording to this, and an email address if anybody would like access to that, because there's so much stuff that we just don't have time to cover, so that'll be included. In terms of the application process itself, it's already difficult for a lot of people who just have no idea, and I'm wondering whether that application process has changed at all because of coronavirus.
Yeah, so there are quite important procedural changes to disability benefits because of coronavirus, and this can affect clients who are in the process of making a claim, or they're appealing an award, or they're starting a claim. Mainly, DWP has temporarily suspended all face-to-face assessments. So as I was saying before, with claiming PIP and ESA, where you have to have a medical assessment, these aren't going ahead at the moment, not face-to-face. And this is mainly to safeguard the health of those individuals claiming, as they're most likely to be at risk. So now instead, what they're doing is a health professional will call your client. So we'll have a telephone assessment. They'll write a report based on that assessment and send it to the DWP. We've had a recent client who has had a PIP telephone assessment. He had a T10 spinal cord injury, Asia A, so quite a severe spinal cord injury. He also submitted a lot of medical evidence. Because this injury is so severe, the DWP were able to easily establish that he qualified for the enhanced rate of PIP. But we're unsure how telephone assessments are going to work with people who, their disabilities aren't as clear cut, or they're not, it's not black or white whether they're disabled or not. So it's important to bear that in mind with telephone assessments. There's also a lot of delays to new and current applications for universal credit and ESA, mainly because of all the job redundancies and job cuts because of COVID. So it's important to bear that in mind, that there's a really big backlog at the moment, and where claims might usually take a few months, they're going to take a lot longer than that, because I think the DWP are also working on a reduced workforce, which doesn't help. And it's the same with universal credit. It's also interview by phone now. So it's important to bear those changes in mind.
Additional layers of complexity and delay to an already, tricky system. And if you have these assessments at the minute, obviously telephone assessment, and a client or a person that you're working with isn't happy with their award, what can they do about that?
So there are options for people to appeal a decision made by the DWP if they're not happy with their benefits award. But before you can appeal to a tribunal, you have to ask for a reconsideration of the decision. And this is called a mandatory reconsideration. And if you request this, the DWP has to look at your claim again, and they have to give you a response. You can submit further evidence at this point, but more often than not, the same decision will be made because it's looked at by the same organisation. So it's important to bear that in mind. If you have a mandatory reconsideration decision, which is the same as the original decision, you can then take the benefit to appeal. And this is to a completely independent tribunal. There's nothing to do with the DWP. This is, with the HMCTS, and you have to appeal within 1 month of that mandatory reconsideration decision. And again, you can submit further evidence, and what will happen is that your case will be heard in a tribunal with a judge, and the client can attend this in person to give further evidence, and then they'll make a decision based on their own findings. Because of the current pandemic, all in-person hearings are suspended. So instead, a tribunal judge will assess the case without a hearing, and will just base the decision on the documents and evidence that they have. And after that, they'll give a provisional decision to the client. And if they disagree, they can ask for a hearing, but it will be over telephone, which which may not be ideal for some clients. We have one client who was offered a telephone hearing, but because she thinks that she won't be able to articulate her point across as well as she would in person, she's actually asked for it to be delayed until in-person hearings are up and running again. And she's aware that, you know, this could be months or a year, but she's willing to put it on hold just because of that. So that's definitely something to bear in mind.
Yeah, of course. It's a frightening concept for a lot of people as well, the whole appeals process, I guess, because a lot of people obviously go so far, get to a stage where they get their award, and then there's more work to be done if they're not content with their award. And in terms of clients that decide that they do want to appeal, what can we do as practitioners? What can we do to sort of best prepare them?
Firstly, I'd say make sure you don't miss the deadline. It's a very strict deadline of 1 month from the mandatory reconsideration decision. And if you're late submitting an appeal, they might not hear your appeal, especially now that they're so backlogged, they might just dismiss it. You can still ask for appeal if you're late, but you have to give, you know, extenuating circumstances, you know, such as you were unwell in hospital, etc. But it's worth bearing in mind that they, you know, despite this, they still might strike out the appeal if it's late. So definitely, you know, be strict about deadlines and make sure that they act quickly once they get the mandatory reconsideration decision. Secondly, it's important to get plenty of current up-to-date medical evidence. Otherwise, the tribunal will only look at the existing medical evidence that they have, which could be out of date, and the DWP's health assessment. So it's really important to get as much medical evidence as possible. I think the more the better in this circumstance, just so the judge can get a full, you know, well-rounded view of the client's situation. It's also important to present that information in accordance with the framework of the DWP assessment criteria for the benefit. And these can be found online and are quite easy to source. We've got a recent pro bono client who she's got a spinal cord injury. She was making progress in rehab. She had a PIP reassessment after a couple of years of receiving the benefits, and the DWP took away all of her benefit because they thought she'd really improved. But this wasn't the case. She still had ongoing issues daily because of her spinal cord injury. So what we did is we sourced a lot of updated medical evidence. We asked for reports. We also wrote a witness statement from her specifically referring to the PIP assessment criteria and the points that she failed on, and we basically just, you know, disputed everything that the DWP had said, and her PIP was reinstated to the highest rate. So it's definitely worth, you know, it's definitely worth fighting back if you think you haven't got the right award. I mean, such a thorough approach can be quite emotionally draining for the client, but it does give them the best chance of receiving full entitlement. And it's really important to do that for them. We actually have an article which has just come out, which one of my colleagues wrote about this specific case study. So we'll link that as well after this.
Yeah, definitely. That would be great. Grace, thank you. Just to pick up on one point that you said, the medical evidence that you refer to, I'm assuming that doesn't need to be any sort of formal evidence. That can be a letter from a GP or kind of an extract from medical notes or something, I presume, rather than something formal.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a formal report. It could just be a discharge summary, a letter from a GP, a letter from a consultant, anything like that, really.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. As always, we probably could have talked on this subject forever, and we don't have time, unfortunately. So I'm gonna round up, but thank you ever so much, Grace. I really appreciate that. It was really useful. And I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna link the details to contact our pro bono team if anyone has any questions, and the guides that Grace has mentioned as well will all be linked. So if you have any questions that we haven't been able to cover off today, then please feel free to get in touch. You will, if you're a regular listener to Soundbites, you're going to be massively relieved when I tell you that next week you're going to have a break from me, because my colleague and one of the partners at the firm, Warren Maxwell, is going to be hosting next week's session, and he's going to be talking about water therapy, and it's going to be really, really interesting. It's going to apply specifically to people that have sustained spinal cord injury and the benefits of water therapy, so that's definitely one to tune into. But yeah, that's it. Everybody stay safe, and we'll see you soon.